Hello. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the second session of the 2020 Football People Festival, the future of women's football. I'm Amanda Davis, sports anchor at CNN. Delighted to be back in the studio. I haven't seen much of this for the last 7 months or so, but I'm also delighted to be your host this evening for what promises to be a fantastic hour or so of discussion. As I'm sure you know, this session forms a part of FAIR's Football People Festival. Hashtag Football People, for those of you who want to get involved in social media. It's the largest campaign for social change and diversity in global football, with over 150,000 people across the world participating in activities every year. We've got the first ever inaugural Football People Festival this year, though, as a sign of the times. We've got 12 sessions over 5 days, tackling the big issues around social change in and through festival. And this one promises to be a goodie. As I said, we're going to be looking at the future of women's football. Perhaps instead of asking what is the future, asking who is the future. How has the recent growth of the women's game changed access to the women's game? What are the most effective pathways and some of the barriers facing women and girls wanting to get involved? And as you can see, I am delighted to have a stellar lineup of panelists who I'm going to ask to introduce themselves, starting with Sarai Bareman, FIFA Chief Women's Football Officer. Sarai, great to see you.
Great to see you, Amanda. Fantastic introduction. I feel like I'm watching the news. You've got an excellent setup there. Hi, everybody. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to all those that are tuning in. As Amanda mentioned, my name is Sarai Bareman. I have the fantastic privilege to be the Chief Officer in charge of women's football in FIFA. And I'm very, very excited and honoured to be part of this panel and to have a discussion this evening with these incredible women.
Fabulous to see you. I know we were meant to see each other 7 months ago. A lot has happened since then. Sarai joining us from Zurich. Let's head over to Utah, where Tziarra King, Utah Royals player, is joining us.
Hi, everyone. Like Amanda said, my name is Tziarra King. I play for the Utah Royals in the NWSL, and I am super excited to be in company with such distinguished ladies here. So super excited to be here.
Great to see you as well. And then we've got Jin Seninde, Ugandan international, the first female Ugandan to play abroad. Is that right, Jin?
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Jin Seninde, and I'm a footballer, but also a founder for the Sseninde Foundation, and also the founder for the Sseninde Women's Development Cup. Also a member for the CAF Women's Football Committee, and I'm really, really humbled to be in the presence of these amazing women today, and I'm excited for the discussion we are going to have today.
Thanks, Jean. We can't wait to hear more from you. And last, but by no means least, joining us from Brussels, Haifa Tlili, sociologist from the Free University of Brussels.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you all, and also to have this very important conversation around the football, the future of women in football. I'm now in Paris. but yeah, I'm involved in a laboratory in a Belgium university, and it's an intersectional laboratory, and I'm more and more engaged in intersectional reflection around women, Muslims women, hijabis, and around the body, the health, sport issues. Yeah, it's a mix, but it's around representation and discourses. How can we deconstruct discourses for a better well-being socially?
Okay, well, it's so fantastic to have everybody together. We may be separated by some lockdown restrictions and a few thousand miles, but thank you to all of our panelists for joining us. Thank you to everybody who's joining us watching this session live. You will also have your chance to ask your questions. Please do send them in via the chat function. They will be sent to me, and I'll try and get through as many as I can throughout the course of the discussion. Please do put your name and where or the organization you work for as well. And as I said, we'll try to get through as many as possible, but let's not waste any more time. I suppose the first question, where do we stand now? And Sarai, I remember the last time I properly spoke to you in a work capacity was just in that final week of the Women's World Cup in France. And we were talking about how it had exceeded expectations, even with that bar having been set so high. Where do you think we stand now with the state of the women's game compared to then?
Thinking about the Women's World Cup in France last year, it still gives me goosebumps. As you said, it really exceeded all expectations, and it was a huge milestone moment for women's football. I think, obviously the current situation with coronavirus has had an impact on our game. We can't deny that. But it's had an impact on football in general. We saw many of our member associations and different organisations having to suspend or cancel competitions. And of course, that's going to have an impact. And I can certainly remember in the early days of the lockdown, feeling apprehensive and talking to different women's football stakeholders and having conversations about how we thought this was going to impact our game. And of course, naturally, everybody was feeling, I would say, a little bit scared about losing the momentum that we'd gained in France. But I have to say, in recent months, those initial fears have actually been allayed. We've seen, certainly from a FIFA level, we've doubled down on the investment and prioritisation of women's football since this coronavirus has come about. And we've seen the same from many of our stakeholders. And I think what's important is we had so much positive airtime and so much coverage and just amazing spin-off impact of the Women's World Cup. And we've got to maintain that. And I think it's important that our narrative is also keeping that positive momentum going at the same time. So yeah, we're no doubt in a different place. I don't think any of us anticipated what this virus would be doing, but I'm still very positive, and I'm certainly still working every day to make sure that the next Women's World Cup will be bigger, better, and even more successful than what we saw in France.
Have you had any concerns that the women's game almost has been the first to have its funding cut, in terms of all sorts of organisations struggling to deal with the coronavirus pandemic? I know we've had in England the Premier League, the men's game came back, but the WSL didn't at the end of last season. Is it almost the default setting, or are we past that now with the women's game?
Look, I think, there are financial and economic reasons why different stakeholders would have had to have suspended or cancelled their games. I was speaking quite closely with my colleagues at the FA around the decision on stopping the Women's Super League. And, the reality is the economic and financial landscape of the men's game is far, far different to women's football. And that's not to say that, we shouldn't be prioritising the women's game and we shouldn't continue investing in the game. But the current reality is that there is a huge gap between what we're seeing commercially, financially on the men's side than the women's side. And, that led to, in some cases, women's football being suspended while the men's game carried on.
Jean, I know you're based here in the UK. You're a former QPR women's player. What was your view on that decision when they took that call to keep the men's Premier League going, but not the WSL?
you know, for me, I've come to learn as time has gone on with women's football, we have to be a bit more realistic. So I know that FA is one of the federations that fights a lot to see women's football have the equal opportunities, just like the men's football. But by the time they came to that decision, like just like Sarai said, it comes down to the financial side of things for women's football. We cannot force that side of things when it comes to how much money the men make and how much money the women's make. I think we have to be a bit more realistic in that sense. And I'm sure that we would have loved the WSL to continue, but we also want a season to complete when the women are playing under the right conditions, have the right support. And I feel like cancelling it at that point is not what we wanted, but maybe it could have been the best for the sake of the financial side of things.
And Tziarra, from where you're sitting, you know, I remember sitting in France and we were very much leading the way in terms of talking about the US national women's team winning another Women's World Cup, leading the way in the news bulletins and the sports bulletins and the business bulletins. The women's game was very much up there. Have you noticed a shift in terms of its profile, or has that now dropped off? Or where's your reading of where things stand today?
You know, I think in a large sporting event year, a World Cup and Olympics, you know, soccer gets, you know, the recognition and the hype that, you know, it should get all the time here in America. But, you know, I think with, you know, everything kind of going on right now with coronavirus and our league was kind of, you know, we had to do like a shortened version and a bubble type scenario. It kind of, you know, in a way helped to bring more viewership. You know, we got, you know, CBS to, you know, put some games on their platform. And so I think that, you know, sparked people's interests. But at the same time, you know, I think there's still so much more to be done. And starting with, you know, the equal pay, you know, lawsuit that obviously the women's national team has been trying to fight. So I think there's definitely a lot of room for improvement. But I think, like I said, in those bigger years, soccer gets, you know, that hype that it deserves. So
what's your take on where we'll end up with equal pay? You've gone there early, so I'm going to go with it.
I mean, you know, it's unfortunate that it's even something that has to be discussed and has to be, you know, fought for in 2020. And, you know, like Jean was saying, you know, the financial aspect of things is complicated, but just from a very, you know, strip it down to the basic type thing, like women should be getting paid for the same amount of work that they're doing. So I just, you know, hope that some way there can be a resolution where, you know, this same work is appreciated and supported and, you know, paid for women. So
there has been a lot of progress, hasn't there, across a number of the national teams in terms of equaling out the wages for time with the national teams, in terms of facilities, in terms of everything around the team. On a day-to-day basis, Tziarra, from what you're experiencing, how much is that kind of filtering down as a player in a domestic league?
You know, I think it's kind of frustrating in a sense to think like, okay, you know, we come in the same times, we spend the same amount of time at this building, you know, we go to practice the same amount, we travel the same amount, we, you know, all these things, but like the significant difference between, you know, the men's side paychecks and our paychecks is like, you know, it's like, how can that be? Like, there has to be a way, you know, for this gap to be closed. And I don't have all the answers, and I don't know, you know, that's why these conversations are so important, because it helps to, you know, get to the answer, get to the bottom of these things. And like I said, I just hope that, you know, we can get there. So,
Sarai, how much of your time do you spend having these conversations?
You know, quite often, and to be honest, Tziarra is right. These conversations have to take place. And it's one of the things that I loved about the Women's World Cup in France last year. You know, aside from the event itself and the football, it provided an incredible platform for those athletes to raise their voices and those discussions to become mainstream. I mean, we started to see, you know, mainstream media all over the digital platforms. There were big conversations going on around gender equality, equal pay. And it's important, you know, that we use football and the events like the Women's World Cup as a platform to progress those discussions. And, you know, I have no doubt that this will be an ongoing discussion until the point comes where women are earning, you know, equal to men for playing the game that they love.
Haifa, what's your take on where we stand in terms of accessibility to women's football, and you know how much progress is being made in that department?
I have my own point of view. I'm not a specialist in football, but I'm a specialist on women who want to play and they wear the hijab. And actually in France, it's an horrible situation. We have more and more women excluded from the pitch. There is no answers. They didn't take care about their will to play, and that's really a very sad situation, especially for women, for the empowerment of women. We need women. We need more and more women and the diversity of the women. But I'm very sad of the French situation, and I'm afraid for the future. But the positive thing is when we spoke with the women and especially the hijabis, they are so optimistic, so powerful, and this is their life. They want to play. They only want to play, and that's my point. I have my own experience in football. I think it's not in the same level with the others, but with the hijabis and the visibility of the hijabis and the fact that we have to take into account this population, I think we're just open the door now with them and by them.
Can you begin to quantify the ban for female players wearing hijabis was in place for such a long time? Can you begin to quantify how damaging that was in terms of acting as a barrier for young girls, for young women playing football?
Yeah, this is a very important question. I think outside of France, we have some percentage, some statistics, and I think it's interesting to have this view. But in France, it's impossible to have this kind of statistic on race and ethnicity, and that's the first problem. That if we want to fight this kind of discrimination, Islamophobia in football, we need this statistic. But we know that more and more women are engaged, are visible. They cannot play in a high level, but they are more and more involved in their suburb, in the city, and they just assume their will to play like the others. And it's something not countable, not yet, but we will do it with the group of hijabis that we are working with, a collective, fabulous collective, hijabis, but also association, NGO, Alliance Citoyenne, also Women Win, Fair Network help us also. But I think collectively we can change the mentality inside the community and outside the community.
Because the ban has now been lifted, but how confident are you that enough people are taking advantage of that it really is an open season, as it were?
Yeah, because it's not a new problem, the hijab ban generally in the society. It's a long history, maybe since 1993 or 5, the first problem with the hijab. Now, the generation of Muslims, they just started to understand the discourses around the hijab, and they feel that now the mother wait, the grandmother was afraid, and they just, take off the hijab. But for them now, they said that we cannot wait anymore. There is no change. We have to provoke the change. We have to lead the change, because if we have to take the mic. If no one asks us, or no one wants to see us like a sporty woman or football player, like others, we have to show them. And I think that this leadership, but it's leadership by reaction of violence. It's another kind of leadership, but with this kindness and the network that we create, we can slowly by slowly create a more impactful involvement of hijabis in France.
Because Jean, let me come to you. It's one thing, isn't it, talking about finances and changing accessibility because of money. It's a very different thing when we talk about changing attitudes and changing beliefs. And I know that's something that your foundation works quite a lot with.
I think talking about what Sarai just said, the impact of the World Cup, I think for me, starting my foundation, it started with the fact that I as a Black woman, I didn't have opportunities in Africa. And had I had the opportunities back home, probably I wouldn't have gone with the option of traveling out of Africa to come abroad. I would have stayed back home to be able to play. But if we talk about the impact of the World Cup, especially to the African community, it has been very important because it changes the mentality of so many other people. It changes the perception of people in Africa, because in Africa we have, there are a lot of cultural taboos where playing football as a woman, you're not allowed to play football, you're not allowed to dress in a trouser in some cultures as well. So the World Cup changes that perception because it is on a big stage, and that stage is a very good stage. And so many people are happy because they are seeing successful stories. If you look at African stars like Oshuala, you can see that people are seeing these success stories and it's changing people's mentalities. Talk about sponsors who are watching this World Cup in Africa. They are going to continue supporting because they see, wow, it is changing a lot of lives. If we talk about stakeholders who could come on board to support women's football, that is also something important. And a bigger platform. After the World Cup, you could see a lot of African player faces have been known by everybody. And now people have the platform in Africa to speak up. And then if you have a big platform, people can listen when you speak. It brings up a negotiation with your federation, because now they believe that you can go at the world stage and make it happen as well. And for me, the World Cup wasn't just about competing and winning trophies, and it was about also bringing a lot of people together, bringing a lot of countries together. If you see the women's football world around everywhere, both in Africa, Europe, and everywhere else, you could see, if you could hear a women's US team fighting for equal pay, it wasn't just the US fighting for that. Other countries are picking a leaf and they know where to go. And if you see Africa, maybe it's not the right time for that yet, but it's giving people something to think about. They know that now in the future, this is where we need to be at. When you see Nigeria and Cameroon celebrating reaching the quarterfinals of the World Cup, it's not just Cameroon, it's the whole Africa celebrating, because now the people know that these countries need more support to get there. And if you hear things of stadiums selling out, the numbers of viewers growing up, that is changing a lot of mentalities, and it's breaking records, and it's giving hope to so many girls in Africa to believe that one day our country is going to be there, or one day I have the opportunity to play in a World Cup. And what has that done? So many countries, let's say in Africa, we've learned from Europe what they are doing. And now, later on, Africa has launched its first women's football strategy. And that means the World Cup has brought everybody together. It's not just Europe launching strategy, Africa is also launching strategy. So now we need to give them a voice. We need to give so many African girls and women and stakeholders, we all need to have a voice so that we continue empowering others to speak up, and together we can support women's football in Africa and elsewhere around the world in communities who don't have the opportunities.
I can see Sarai nodding, and I want to come on to the balance between expanding the World Cup and inviting more and more countries in versus developing the grassroots of the game. But I'm going to come to you, Tziarra, because there's a lot of talk here about perceptions and how people see the women's game, how people think it is, how people think it should be. You grew up playing your football in the United States. The United States has dominated the women's game for such a long time. You would think it was easy for you to get into the game, but that very much wasn't your experience, was it?
Right. So the system here in the US, it's bountiful, there's options, there's teams, there's this and that, but I think where the struggle is getting to that next level. It's like, okay, like when you're younger, it's like everybody's kind of playing like recreational. And then it's like, okay, but how do we get, especially like minorities and diverse groups to expand? How do we get them to the college level? How do we get them to the professional level? How do we get them into boardrooms, into coaching opportunities, reffing, all these different things. And I think that is a situation that needs a lot of improvement here. I think that the pay to play system here in the US makes it, really difficult for a lot of, lower income or, inner city type individuals to have those same opportunities. And so I think that, there's a lot of room for improvement. So.
How much is the recent focus on racial injustice, on discrimination, particularly in the wake of the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, how has that helped the fight, or has it? Has it almost detracted from football's fight?
I think that, league, for example, the WNBA is a league in the United States that's very outspoken and vocal about, these issues, and they always have been. And I think this year, the NWSL has kind of, gotten more up to speed a little bit in terms of, having these conversations and really looking in the mirror and recognizing like, okay, there are things that need to be improved. And so I think that, this year has kind of opened a lot of people's eyes in a broad spectrum across the world, across the country. Like a lot of people are starting to realize like, okay, like, Black and brown and minority communities are facing oppression that, people ignored and refused to acknowledge for years. And so I think that, especially in the soccer world, people are starting to realize like, okay, like, how can we get these opportunities into these communities? How can we get these opportunities for more diversity? Because people like to use diversity as a punchline without actually backing it up. So how can we get actual diversity, in this field? So
how can we? What would your answer be?
Like I said, I wish I had the answer, because if I did, it would be fixed already. And I think a lot of people feel that same way. But I think, it really just starts with, honestly, like redoing the whole system. Like, how can we get it where costs are low? How can we get it where, fields are accessible? And, it's just so many things that are like, are we tailoring it to a population of people that don't have the ability to pay X, Y, and Z for travel, for uniforms, for registration fees? Like, how can we pare it down so that everybody's welcome and it's not an exclusive, club almost? So,
Sarai, the difficulty with this is, particularly with a region like CONCACAF, the resources that you're dealing with across the board are so different, aren't they? So varied across a region. how can you as FIFA begin to try and deal with that? How do you prioritize in these scenarios?
Yeah, it's, you know, we have 211 member associations, and every single one of those countries has its own unique and individual challenges and environment. And, you know, I don't think there is one particular answer. I think there needs to be a multifaceted approach. I think from the top down, governing bodies like FIFA, CONCACAF, US Soccer, those that are running and delivering football, they need to make use of the regulatory framework that we have, where we can put clauses and specific things where we can mandate the participation of girls or minorities or accessibility, you know, for them through the regulatory framework. At the same time, I think there needs to be a bottom-up approach. We need to get down into the grassroots level and actually get into the communities and try to understand what are the challenges on the ground that are actually stopping these people from coming into the game. And how do we partner with not only football, but organizations outside of football to help us to overcome some of those barriers. I think communication is a very, very important part of it. I think that having a strong communication campaign around participation in those countries is also important, because a lot of it can sometimes come down to perception. There are still some regions in the world where it's negatively perceived to be playing women's football. You know, so there's a really important piece that needs to be done around communication of women's football and the positive impacts that it can have. And that's one of the great things that Jean mentioned earlier about the Women's World Cup. You know, it's a global impact. It happens everywhere, not just in the teams that are participating. But what I guess a lot of people don't understand, especially those that aren't, you know, in women's football day in and day out, is that what we saw on the playing fields in France last year at the World Cup, it's actually a far cry from reality for a vast majority of women's football players, teams, clubs, and stakeholders. So it's a multifaceted approach. It needs to be top down, it needs to be bottom up, and we have to work together with as many stakeholders as we can in and outside of football to try and give access to those girls.
Given that, see, in terms of the, you know, the wide disparity between the state of the women's game across the globe, you know, should you really be looking at it, you know, expanding a Women's World Cup, getting more teams involved at that level? Would the money not be better spent at a grassroots level, developing across the board?
Yeah, it's a very good point. And the answer is both. You have to do both. We know from FIFA level that, you know, global competitions are the biggest catalyst for driving development. When you have regular national team competitions, for example, the qualifiers for the Women's World Cup, the regional competitions, and the event itself, the national team is active. They're constantly active. They're in camp, they're playing friendly matches, and for the national team to be active, it means that the pool of players that are selected from needs to be active. The talent pathway underneath that needs to be active. The national league where they select the players from needs to be active. So we know that competitions is a top-down driver. And by expanding, you know, the number of slots available at the Women's World Cup will immediately increase the number of countries that have access to that pathway. And I think we'll also immediately see much more activity in terms of that high performance pathway. But as you say, that alone is not going to make an impact when you understand that vast majority of countries right now won't have the chance to play at the World Cup. So we have to invest across the entire ecosystem. And you know, we came up with a global strategy for women's football and FIFA 2 years ago now, actually 2 years ago this month. And the very framework of that strategy is to address all different aspects of women's football, you know, development, commercialization, communication, leadership and governance, empowerment of women and girls. And you really have to make an impact across all those pillars to see a sustainable long-term growth. At the same time, you do something at the World Cup level, it's going to accelerate, but that alone is not what is going to make the difference.
One thing I must ask you about, I don't know whether you saw the Women in Football report that came out last week, that 66% of women in football, this is a UK-based report, have suffered some form of gender discrimination. And Women in Football, as I know a lot of people will know, is an organisation made up of a real cross-section of women, people on the pitch, off the pitch, in broadcasting, in administration, within football. That has been very quickly followed this weekend by Sergio Aguero of Manchester City, being condemned in large part for putting his arm around the assistant referee, Sian Massey Ellis. What was your take on that, Sarai? You were a former player, you are now head of women's football for FIFA. Your view on it?
Look, I think before I say anything, I want to commend Sian. She handled that situation incredibly well. She was very professional, and she didn't react. And for me, she handled it incredibly well. I think that's the first thing I have to say. Look, I've seen it, I've read all the comments in social media, I've read all the articles and everything, and although it looked harmless, it appeared to be even friendly in some comments I'm seeing said, for me it's very clear that gesture, despite how it looked, was designed to intimidate her. And for me, that is absolutely unacceptable. I don't think we would have seen that happen if it was a male assistant referee. And I found it unacceptable. I think she dealt with it in a very correct way. She didn't react at all. She didn't even give him eye contact or a reaction, which was the right thing to do. But I thought, it was unacceptable. And no matter how it looked, no matter how friendly it may have come across, the intention behind it was surely to intimidate her.
Do you think there should be some kind of repercussions, some punishment for it?
Look, I think that at the very least, there needs to be an acknowledgement of it. Whether there's punishment or sanctions or whatever it is, I think, that's not for me, but I think that there should be some kind of acknowledgement and support for Sian and for all officials, for all match officials. They need to be supported by their league, their member association, their competition. And when something like this happens, and particularly in such a very public way, there needs to be some kind of acknowledgement from those governing bodies, in this case the league, to acknowledge it and to come out in support of those match officials.
Tziarra, what was your take on it? It's interesting, Sarai is saying that Sian dealt with it in the right way. Another piece of data that came out of that Women in Football report was that only 12% of women who had suffered incidents of sexual discrimination in the workplace had reported those incidents of racism, incidents of discrimination. And that is something that a lot of people picked up on. Why are women not saying more? Why are these women in football not speaking out and making more of a point about it?
Right. Similar to what Sarai had said, it's a matter of intimidation, being in a space where, you're one of the only women, it's intimidating. And it's unacceptable that, even still, this is something that we have to be having a conversation about. And it stems from, honestly, men having these conversations in their spaces and making their spaces safe and welcoming spaces for women to be in. There's no, if women could have solved the issue would be solved. Like, we would never have sexual intimidation, discrimination, any of that if it was up to us. And so, you know, when I saw that video, I was like, what even went through your head to think that was okay? You know, like, we learn from whatever age, like, don't put your hands on anyone else. Like, don't, especially not women. And that's something that I think women go through a lot, like unsolicited touching. Like, don't walk past me, don't touch my arm, don't touch my back, just don't. And so I think that, like I said, it's something that men need to be held accountable for. So. And
I think for me, the way Pep Guardiola reacted to it, it's trying to say, well, he said Sergio Aguero is a nice guy. He might be a nice guy, but that doesn't necessarily forgive what happened on the pitch. I don't know what your reaction was, Jean.
For me, to be fair, this is totally unacceptable. And for me, one of the solutions we need to do for that, we need to get more women in positions where they can make the decisions and be able to stop such incidents. Because if we have so many men, it makes it impossible for many of them to see it as a wrong thing. For me, I feel like it's not just what happened on the pitch, but even what happens for women who work in football off the pitch. So many women don't report these cases because they are scared of losing their positions. Women take a long time to earn their spots, and once they earn it, they don't want to be the people who are reporting things that should be reported. So many of them end up staying silent for so many reasons, you know, and nobody should ever go through such incidents. So for me, I always say, let's get more women in those positions. That doesn't mean we don't need the men, because we need them to work alongside them, but we need to get more women in football so that women can continue supporting other women and changing policies so that there is that equality and a good balance between all of us.
Haifa, from a sociological point of view, what, from your perspective, is the best way of dealing with these issues and beating discrimination?
You know, it's women in that situation, they are minority. There is no lot of referees like her in that situation. I think we have create a space of discussion and able to coach this kind of incidents for men and for women, and to prepare, anticipate, and concretely find the best solution in each situation. It's the violence, but it's not a neutral violence. It's they want to take power in that situation. He want to be, you know, to be little higher than the referee, and it's not acceptable, because he play with his gender domination. I think it's not acceptable. Sociologically, we have to concretely listen and anticipate and coach, and also coach men for that situation. I don't think that it's a reflex, like a natural reflex. It's not natural. It's not acceptable.
I like what Haifa's saying there about, you know, we have to bring men into this. It's not something that we can fight alone as women. And actually, there are many, many good, upstanding, respectable men that work in football. And for me, it's important that those men alongside us, when we see these discriminatory behaviors or inappropriate touching, inappropriate comments, whatever it may be, it's up to us to call it out, and to call it out right then and there when it's happening. And, you know, if the situation doesn't allow it and you see something happen that is inappropriate, you know, even if you do it later on, for example, if it happens during a meeting, you see a man say something disrespectful towards a woman that is completely inappropriate. Maybe it's not the time to address it at that meeting, but there's nothing to stop us after that meeting approaching that guy and say, hey, listen, I didn't appreciate what you said to her in that meeting. that was not acceptable, and this isn't the kind of behavior that we should be having within our workspace, within our organization. So it's something we have to do together. It's not something that women can, I think, defeat alone. And we have to lean on and also rely on the men around us to call it out when they see it happening. And for those that are doing it, to be put on the spot.
How much have you found, Sarai, in the last 18 months since the World Cup, given the wider societal discussion in recent times in terms of social and racial injustice and discrimination? How have you found the support of the women's game has changed or not? Is it the same stakeholders who have a bigger pot of resource who are investing more in the women's game? Or are you finding more momentum and people buying into it?
Yeah, exactly what you've said there at the end. We've seen a massive uptake of countries that aren't typically the more developed women's football countries. We recently launched a new set of development programs and some specific funding under our COVID relief plan, which is ring-fenced specifically for women's football. And through that, we've been able to see a big uptake in terms of investment, prioritization and activity towards women's football. And, not from your typical, highly developed women's football countries. I think the other thing is that, there's a lot more creativity around the types of programs that we're getting applications for, that not only focus on the football aspects of it, but also touch on what are the social impacts that those football programs can have. And that's something that I'm seeing far more often now. It's becoming a lot more common that football federations will be partnering with NGOs, different kind of agencies, to use the game not only for their, participation, football reasons, but to see how they can make positive impacts for women and girls. And that for me is very encouraging and really positive to see.
Okay, we are running out of time. I've just seen the time, so we're going to go for a few questions. We have one from Susie Andreas in Poland. The current promotion of women's football relies on showing that football does not deny the conventional definition of femininity. How can women's football be more inclusive, e.g. of women and LGBT plus people in its promotional strategies? Don't know. Sarai, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I get what she's saying there. A lot of imagery that you see around the women's game is, the pretty, slim, typical kind of, often white female players. And yeah, we have to diversify that. We have to, if we want to increase participation and give access to the game for these girls that we're talking about that are being discriminated against, they need to be able to see role models and women and girls in the commercials, in the advertisements, on the field, in the way that clubs and member associations are promoting their national teams. They need to see women that look like them. And, it should be based on diversity. I mean, there should be specific targets around advertising and promotion that, aim towards having a more diverse picture of what women's football is.
Tziarra, there was a wry smile from you. Go for it.
Yeah, I think, honestly, people, especially like when doing promotions or doing, advertising, are afraid of like inclusivity, are afraid of a picture that's different from, the typical thing. And that's something that I personally am very passionate about, because like, I have short hair. Like I'm Black. I don't see a lot of things and say, oh, like that person looks like me, that person, And representation is so, so, so important, especially for the younger generation, to say like, I see her, she looks like me, I can be in her shoes, I can be doing the same thing that she's doing. And so I think that, like you said, Sarai, like there has to be like a diversity. And like I said, diversity is a buzzword these days, but there genuinely has to be like people willing to make these advertisements cater to an actual population of people, not just say, okay, well, this is what people want to see, because no, that's not what people want to see. People want to see the widespread of diversity, what makes this world so amazing. So I just think that, you know, there needs to be change in that as well.
So Zoe W says, thank you to Tziarra for collaborating with NWHL on inclusive t-shirt designs. How would you like to see American soccer improve in terms of its representation?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, you know, anytime you hear women's sports, you see a ponytail, you see, you know, for example, you know, US Soccer just released some shirts that were like soccer cutie. Like this is not like, I feel like they want to sell like this idea of like femininity and women, and like we just want to be soccer players. We just want to feel empowered, and that looks so different in so many different ways. That could maybe people love pink. I do love pink, but also I have short hair. Like there's so much freedom and flow, and I just think that, you know, incorporating these gender roles into, you know, into advertising and things like that is just not necessary. Like just let the product sell itself. Like women are cool and awesome in all forms, in all shapes, in all ways. So just let that shine, you know?
Jean, what did a Ugandan female footballer look like in your eyes as you were starting out on your journey?
I mean, for me, when I describe where I started from, it was very, very difficult. And like I said earlier, had I had opportunities back home, I would have completely stayed there and I would have never opted to travel. But I think women's football has grown so much in all countries. But if we speak of Africa, I think we still need to continue pushing a little bit more. I think that will come with the governance systems. They have to be right to start with, because if you have good governance, if you have people who are passionate in those positions, and people who have the knowledge and who have the qualifications, I think that would be key to driving women's football in the right direction, so that we can catch up a little bit closer to the European countries. But also that the exposure, I think a lot of things that I've learned, if I was, for example, in Uganda, I wouldn't have learned them if I hadn't traveled. But it doesn't mean everybody has the opportunity to travel. So the exchange programs have been very good. If you talk of the UEFA Assist program, which has helped a lot of African countries, like exchanging in the MS, teaching the member association general secretaries, I think that has been of much help. And I think also what as Tziarra said and Sarai, the role models, it's helping a lot of the success stories. I think for me, seeing players, African players on that stage, it's giving a lot of hope, and it's also ensuring that football is acceptable to so many other young girls in Africa. But we also have to walk the talk. A lot of times we talk and there is no actions. So we need to follow everything we say and put it in action. And also in the side of Africa, we need to empower our administrators. So many times FIFA gives a directive, or CAF gives a directive to have women development officers in Africa, but some of them don't really have a voice to say anything or contribute to something to the table. So we need to empower more women around the world, more women around Africa, more women who are in these positions, so that they are able to have their voices heard. And not just people in positions. Us as footballers, administrators, coaches, and stakeholders, we have a responsibility to continue using our voice, so that we continue amplifying everybody's voice who can say anything, so that so many girls, minority groups are supported to play football.
Hi, Farah, I can see you nodding.
Yeah, it's wonderful to listen to you, Sarah, and Tziarra, and also Jin, because, you know, it's clear the identity of women. It's plural, it's moving, it's complex. It's not one, you know, it's not in a box like this. And sometimes people, you know, in the top, I don't want to generalize, but in the top, they didn't see all the complexity of the population. And I like the fact that you said, Tziarra, like let the diversity be. Let just the diversity be. You don't have to control it. If you want to really to engage the population, just let them be what they want and what they want to be on the pitch, outside of the pitch. You know, I'm very concentrated on minority of minority, because here in France they don't want to see the hijabis. It's not, you know, it's not a noble subject. But what is inside the box? It's not the veil, it's not the object. It's something more important. It's self-esteem. It's, you know, the power of the woman to be an example, to show that they can change the world. And I'm very sad for France, because they don't want to accept any hijabi in the French team. You cannot imagine what is the impact of that. One of the girls said to me, I'm sad because if I don't see a hijabi in the French team, the French country, they didn't want to accept me. I'm not legitimate in the society. You know, the French team, you know, and I think in French, we are now opening the door, and we are, you know, we can change the rules. And the next rules, it's really to repair that girls, that, you know, Muslims women that lived with the Islamophobic and violence, because they are, you know, target in all the violence. But now with the sport, with football, we can change it, we can repair it. We have a powerful challenge. I think we have to help this kind of federation who are afraid of stigmatization and stereotypes, and but we need help for that.
So we've had a question here. There have also been complaints of sexism and discrimination by referees in Brazil towards players. If the FA doesn't respond to these complaints, what more can players do? And Sarai, I'll come to you. If people feel, for whatever reason, their complaints about discrimination are not being listened to, people within their own federations, within their own organizations aren't listening, what do people do?
Well, I mean, the situation's obviously different in every country. Every country has its own kind of reporting pathways and reporting mechanisms. So I think the first thing I would say is to those referees, players, whoever it is, make sure you know what is the reporting system within your organization if something happens, whether it be abuse, discrimination, whatever it may be. Educate yourself and understand. And that would be my first port of call. I think then, and I'm coming from a very, someone who's worked in football for a long time now, it's a very hierarchical system in football. So I would say if you're at a club level and you're not having any luck there, then you need to go to your regional association or to your member association. If there's something going on there that you don't think is correct, you then need to go to your confederation. And if it cannot be sorted absolutely throughout all those structures, then, you know, FIFA needs to be made aware of it, particularly if it's around, you know, abuse and, you know, outright discrimination, racism, these kind of things. They're not acceptable. They don't belong in football. We don't want them in football. So, you know, we have to work together, I think, as stakeholders to get them out and to make it known to those perpetrators that they have no place in our game.
Haifa, are you confident, or how confident are you that enough is being done to help hijabi wearing players to progress?
I think I'm very optimistic. I think that it's because I see the power of the woman. I see the power of the will. I feel that it's something, normally it's something natural, easy, important to do. But it's more resistance from the actors, sports actors, from the FFF, but also on the field, and they mixed the responsibility. the responsibility of the FFF, it's a huge responsibility because they want to fight discrimination. I'm sorry, to wear hijab, to have this religious belief, you have to respect it. It's, you know, it's in the rules, but they use some diversion like laicity, secularism, and of course, secularism, it's important. It's important for the agenda of the Republic, for the people who are working for the government, but for the others, just stay who you are. And I think with the women, the fact slowly by slowly, they give voices, they create their testimonies, they feel people listen to them, and slowly by slowly, the power, you know, create an emulation very positive. And we see it in few months. And I can imagine in 1 year, or maybe, I hope maybe less than 1 year, we really see the power of that woman, and the place of that hijabis woman, it's on the in the pitch, not outside. Yeah, I'm very positive, but we definitely need sisterhood on that subject. It's a collective discussion. And I think that the Black Lives Matters and also Me Too movement, you know, you see discrimination. In the past, you just say, oh, I'm not concerned, it's okay. Well, I didn't see nothing, or it's their problem, it's not my problem. But now you have to see, you have to listen, you have to change, you have to act. It's impossible. And even if you cannot act, you have to listen them. That's the first step, to listen this woman. And I think that we can provoke that, because it's positive. We will create something positive with that.
I love it. It's taken an hour, but we've had a desk banging moment. Really highlight it. I love it. We are out of time, so I'm going to very quickly go around the room, the virtual room, and really your hopes for the next year. If you could identify one mark of progress that we can make in terms of the development of women's football in the next 12 months. Haifa, let's go with you first.
You know, see diversity, just diversity, the diversity of the woman, and without control, without, you know, imposing rules, you know, just let them be what they are. And that will be perfect, because we see the diversity, and the young generation can also imagine themselves in the diversity, and we will be in a very positive circle. And I think it's not difficult, but it's good if we can do that with respect.
Jin?
For me, I think we talk of equality, but I think we also need to support equity, because so many people would love to be involved in football but don't have the same access. So if together we work as one team and work very hard to include everybody in the world so that they can have equal access or equity to football, to get involved in football, for me, that is my dream, to see everyone around the world who is passionate about football have access to play or to get involved in the game.
Tziarra?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, what both of you just said was absolutely correct. I think, you know, seeing more diversity in that advertising, seeing, you know, all the different facets of women being projected and appreciated and loved. And then also, you know, like Jin had said, having, you know, women from all across the world come together to make improvements for everyone. You know, how can we, you know, get the African countries involved? How can we get the hijabis involved? How can we realize that this is an everyone issue, you know? And I think that that's something over the next year that's very possible, so.
Yeah. And last word to you, Sarai.
You put me on the spot, Amanda. You had to have me going last. Look, I have a long-term dream. And, you know, in the context of this conversation, my dream would be that we are all sitting here having this discussion today about the sport, about football. about the amazing match that we've just seen, or one certain player or a pathway, or something to do with the game. I have a vision that discussions around the women's game will no longer be about discrimination and abuse and our fight for equality and equity, that we just simply will be talking about the sport that we love and the game that we love to watch. In the short term, in the next coming months, I want to see the governing bodies of football and the organisations that are in charge of football prioritising women's football as we come back to normality through this coronavirus pandemic. We need to show clearly from a top-down level through all the football pyramid that women's football remains a priority, that we will still invest into women and girls, and that this virus has not shaken our resolve to grow the game that we love.
Well said. I have to say it was a real privilege today to talk about Vivianne Miedema on my show. 12 goals in 6 games for Arsenal, 52 goals in 50 games, which is quite something, a new record in the WSL. But that is all we've got time for. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you found it thought-provoking. If you've missed any of it or want to watch it back, it will be posted on the YouTube channel. And of course, there's plenty more live sessions over the next 5 days. So do go and have a look. fairnet.org, which of the other football people sessions you want to get involved with. A huge thank you to Tziarra, to Jin, to Sarai, to Haifa, to everybody watching as well. Thank you for your time.